And hello and welcome to Forum 360, our program with a global outlook and a local view. We're on Western Reserve Public Television, Fusion Channels 4549. We're on Rubber City radio stations. We can be heard on WONE and WAKR in Akron, and Hudson Community Television, our host studio. We're always wonderfully given the opportunity to use this studio for Forum 360. This is a great place to be, Hudson, and many of our viewers are from this area. Today we are looking at a topic with a global outlook. It is the judiciary. It's, in this country, the third branch of government. We have the executive, we have the legislative, and the judicial, co-equal governments. And today we have a distinguished guest, a Northeast Ohio native from the Medina County area, graduate of Cloverleaf High School, and he went on to successful law career after Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, after the law school there. We have Judge James Kimbler. Judge, good to see you. The Honorable James Kimbler, good to see you.
Thank you very much.
We have a opportunity to talk about visiting judges. People that are in our viewing and listening audience are often asked, what do visiting judges do? And for many years, we'll get into that, for many years, you know, you sat on the bench at both municipal court level in Ohio and the common police court, state courts, and you learned a lot, you've experienced a lot, you worked with the system in this area, in Medina County especially, here in Northeast Ohio. So we'll get into that a little bit, visiting judge and private visiting judging shortly. But a little bit about your background, how you got involved in the law when you were young and your practices.
Well, actually, that's a good question. So why I went to law school was, first of all, I was horrible at math. So I was not going to be anything that required a mathematical background.
No engineering.
No engineering, probably no medicine. And at the beginning of my senior year in college, it dawned on me that they were going to give me a diploma in June, and they wanted me to go out in the world, you know. And I didn't know what I was going to do, so I took the LSAT, and then I applied to law school, and I got accepted. So I went to law school for 3 years. And while I was in law school, I had an opportunity to clerk for a law firm out in Sandusky. I did a lot of trial work.
Right.
And so they had me come out there as a clerk, and I got involved in litigation. And from there, I worked in a couple of prosecutors' office. I did private litigation. I also worked as a domestic relations referee, is what we used to call magistrates. We now call them magistrates. Right. And so by 1986, when my predecessor in Wadsworth died in office, I had accumulated some experience, and also I wanted to, well, let me put it this way. So Judge C.B. McClure was a judge in the Medina Municipal Court, and he once gave a quote in an article that I thought was pretty humorous and pretty on point. He said, "There's never been a trial lawyer who didn't think to himself or herself at one point, I can do a better job than that person." So when the opportunity, and I pretty much by 86, I had done a lot of stuff I wanted to do as a lawyer. And so when the opportunity came up to go into the Wadsworth Municipal Court, I took it, and I served there for just about almost 11 years. And then I went to the Common Pleas Court in Medina County in 96, and I served there 18 years. And then my wife took my job, so I retired.
And Joyce Kimbler is judge.
Yes, Joyce
the Honorable
Kimbler is
Joyce Kimbler is still,
right.
Still in on the bench.
That's right.
Now, as a retired judge, the Supreme Court of Ohio can assign retired judges that are qualified that become a part of the cadre of judges.
Right.
So how did you get involved in the retired judges program, and what are the qualifications for
Well,
that?
that's a good question. So what happened is there in 1970, I think 1974, the voters of Ohio adopted what was called the Modern Courts Amendment. And the Modern Courts Amendment did two things that relates to judges. One of the things it did was judges are the only elected officials who are aged out. We cannot run once we're 70 years of age.
Okay.
So if you're going to run for judge, the year you turn 70, you cannot run that year. And so that's the one thing they did, and we're the only branch of government that has an age limit. But the other thing they did was they gave the Chief Justice the power to enact rules of superintendence and rules of procedure for the courts in Ohio. And I say Chief Justice, actually it's the Supreme Court as a whole, but the Chief Justice administers the rules. So one of the things one power the Chief Justice has is to appoint retired judges to serve as what she calls assigned judges, and sometimes refers to as visiting judges. So what you have to do actually is the year that I retired, 2015, I sent an application and a resume down to the Chief Justice, and then she put me on a list, I think May or June of that year. And I primarily do trial work in municipal courts and also in common pleas courts. So I've done, since I've been on a retired status or a visiting judge status, I've done about between 16 and 20 jury trials, mostly in common pleas courts, although a couple in muni courts. And then I've also served in a lot of municipal courts across the state, Bowling Green, Morrow County, Struthers, Alliance, places like that.
Some right here in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah, mostly Northeast Ohio. I actually do a lot of work in Summit County,
right,
both in the common pleas court and the muni court.
The court where Chief Justice O'Connor originally served as a judge. Now, who pays for visiting judges?
So visiting judges, if there's a visiting judge under the Supreme Court system, the visiting judge is paid, it depends on what level you're working at. If you're working for the common pleas court, then the judges are paid by the state of Ohio, and there's some system set up where they're reimbursed partly by the counties in which they're sitting. So for example, if I sit in Summit County, I log my hours in on the Supreme Court website, the check comes from the treasurer of the state of Ohio, but I think part of that is being then compensated back, so to speak, by the Summit County, county government. If I'm sitting in municipal court, it's kind of interesting, because when I sit in a municipal court, my money either comes from a combination of sources, both the county and the city. So for example, when I sit in Licking County,
Newark,
yep, that's right, I got a check from the Newark City Auditor and also a check from the Licking County Auditor. So in that situation, they are paying, and then I think they're reimbursed, about 2/3 of that's reimbursed back to the city and county by the state of Ohio. So I would say, if you ask who pays ultimately, it's probably, I would say the majority of the funds are coming out of the treasury of the state of Ohio.
All right, Judge Kimbler, let's say that there is a jury trial coming up, and an attorney said, I used to practice with Judge, we'll just say Judge Smith, in ABC County in Ohio. And the Supreme Court of Ohio would get a notice saying that there was a conflict, that I can't hear my friend's case. I'm an attorney I used to practice with as a judge. So they assign, Chief Justice O'Connor and her people assign Judge Kimbler, James Kimbler, to that county. So what are some of the reasons, other than just a familiar knowledge of each other, that you have been brought in to hear a case?
Right. I would say number one is unavailability of the judge, either vacation or seminars that they have to go to, or illness. I would say, so number one is unavailability of the judge. I would say probably the second reason would be conflicts, but I would say, when I look back at the reasons, when I look back at the people who've contacted me, I would say that probably 75% is vacation or not unavailability of the judge. Probably 25% is conflict. So for example, I had a case up in one municipal court where a defendant, she had some issues, and she had stopped taking medications, and she had made a bunch of threats against the judge, the bailiff, the probation office, everybody she could think of. And when Diane Hayes from the Supreme Court called me, she said, you know, you used to have a mental health docket, and I said, that's correct. And she said, well, we want to appoint, you know, this person to you. And I said, what did they do? And she said, well, they're making threats against the judge. And I said, so Diane, you think I'm too far away, right? She laughed and she said, well, no, that's not quite it.
Yeah, exactly.
But, so that's what usually happens.
So there is some type of conflict or
Right.
some type of issue,
Right.
and that the sitting judge might not be able to hear the case.
Right.
And the qualifications that you and other visiting judges have allow you to do that. In a minute or two, we're going to talk about private judges, which is something that Ohio is using now, and Judge Jim Kimbler has gotten some experience in that area and has been talking to bar associations and attorneys here in Northeast Ohio about the private judging. Now, as I recall, in my experience, I've heard of arbitrations, I've heard of other areas that you don't go through the regular court system, the traditional courthouse, the court system. So we'll be talking a little bit about that issue. But before we go into the private judging, jury trials, they're very important. And I would think in Ohio, as in every state, in the 50 states and perhaps in Puerto Rico and some of the territories, jury trials are at the #1 because they're constitutionally recognized as where our fellow Americans, fellow people, fellow citizens can judge each other.
Yeah, I would say this about jury trials. They are the most direct involvement that normal people can have in the decision-making affairs of their government. Here's what I mean by that. Most of the time when we ask people to be involved with their government, we ask them to do that by voting. And so when they vote, they are making a decision about people who make decisions for them.
Okay.
And that's what elected officials, government officials do. And periodically, those elected officials will come before the people and they'll ask to have their term of office renewed. And if enough people think they should keep their jobs, they keep it. If enough people think they should get rid of their jobs, somebody else gets the job. But in all those situations, the involvement of the citizen on the decisions that those officials make is indirect. But when people sit on a jury, they're making the decisions that become judgments of the court. Right. And so that is probably the most direct involvement they can have in the decision-making affairs of their government. And here's the thing I think is really kind of inspiring about jury service. People have all kinds of reactions to getting the jury notice. Some of them want to serve, some of them really don't want to serve, some are like, you know, I don't want to serve, but if you need me to serve, I'll serve. But the thing that I've noticed is that when we put people in the jury box and we call upon them to make these decisions, they want to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing. And I have probably taken almost 600 verdicts as a judge from juries. And I cannot remember a verdict that I have taken that I could not see how the jury got to where they got. In other words, given the evidence, given the jury instructions, I could see how they got where they got. I'm not saying that I necessarily would have made the same decision, but I'm saying is the decision was not unreasoned.
And it was a group process
that's right.
that the Constitution allows.
Right.
And the judge decides the law and directs them, and then they decide the facts.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I'm not going to sit here and tell people that juries never make mistakes, because juries are human institutions and humans make mistakes. But I will say this, President Bill Clinton once said about voters, they generally get it right. And I think that's true about juries. They generally get it right.
Excellent. We are with Judge Jim Kimbler. If you're viewing on Western Reserve Public Television, channels 45, 49 Fusion channels, Rubber City Radio, you might be listening on WONE or WAKR or on Hudson Community Television. We appreciate your listening or viewing today. We're talking with visiting judge, retired common pleas, and Municipal Judge Jim Kimbler of Medina County. And we are going to talk about a topic that is new, relatively new. It's called private judges. And the judges of Ohio that are getting involved in that, it's a new pilot program probably within a few years, right?
Well, we've actually
had it for a few years.
Yeah, this is actually kind of interesting about private judging. So the revised code section that allows what colloquially or we informally refer to as private judging, has actually been around, I think, since '84.
Okay. So
But it has not been used that much in Northeast Ohio. Where it has had a lot of use is in Franklin County.
Oh, in Columbus area.
That's right. And at one point, I read a story from the Columbus Dispatch, and they said that 20% of the domestic relations docket in Franklin County was being done by retired private judges. So what a private judge is that the kind of cases you can use a private judge, it has to be a civil jury. It has to be a civil non-jury trial. So
civil non-jury.
Civil non-jury. So
no criminal matter.
Can't be a criminal matter.
Could be a domestic relations.
That's right. And it couldn't be a jury trial. But it couldn't be, and domestic relations is a good example because that's primarily where people are using private judges in that form, in that area. So what they do is the parties agree with a judge, a retired judge, that judge will decide their dispute. They enter into a contract with that judge. They pay the judge. The parties, through their attorneys, then file a motion with the court to have the case transferred to a private judge. The court has to do that. The court has no discretion. Once the agreement's been presented, the contract's been presented, they have to have, the transfer has to be made. And then what happens is that we are making arrangements to hear that case, usually in a law office. Sometimes it could be done like in a hotel conference room. We hear the case, I sign the entry, that entry is filed, and it then becomes the judgment of the court. So when I first talked to lawyers in Northeast Ohio about this, they said, well, this is like arbitration. I said, no, it's not like arbitration because it is subject to the Ohio Rules of Evidence, the Ohio Rules of Civil Procedure, the Ohio law.
And it could be appealed.
And it could be appealed, that's right, it could be appealed. And they said, well, no, it's like mediation. I said, no, it's not like mediation because I'm actually making a decision.
You have a real judge here.
Yeah, and
bona fide judicial officer.
That's right. And so you got to ask yourself, why would people do this? And I would say there's probably 3 reasons primarily why people want to use private judges. First of all is convenient. In other words, I can go to a law office, I can go out into the suburbs. If you file a case in Cleveland in the Cuyahoga County Court, you're going to file it downtown. You have to go downtown for that hearing. I don't have to go downtown for those hearings. Second of all, I don't have a full docket, so to speak. I don't have hundreds of cases on my docket. Right. Okay,
pick and choose sometimes.
Yeah, so I can get you into. You can get in to see me for a hearing pretty easily.
More accessible.
More accessible. And I think the other thing is probably, there are some people. Lawyers sometimes forget that most people go through life without dealing with the courthouse and the courtrooms, right. And when I sometimes give lectures to law students, I'll ask them, and I'll say, has any one of you ever had a serious form of surgery? And usually, even though they're relatively young, people one or two will raise their hands. And I'll say, well, how did you feel when they took you into that jury room? You felt scared, you felt nervous, you felt intimidated. Right. I said, that's exactly how your client feels walk into that courtroom. And so I think sometimes as lawyers, we overlook that. And so I think there's a great deal of being comfortable in the situation that they're in. So like this morning, for example, this afternoon, I did 3 domestic relations cases up in Cuyahoga County at the same law offices. Yeah.
So if you use a private judge, we talked a little bit earlier about paying the judges. Obviously, does that go through the state system, or how do the
No, they pay directly.
They pay directly.
They pay directly, usually through the attorneys, what they call the IOLA accounts, interests on
trust
accounts. That's right.
Accounts.
Usually they'll pay it through that, and usually how the parties work it out themselves. Sometimes each party pays 50%. Sometimes one party pays the whole thing. That's usually worked out with the attorneys before I get involved in that.
Do the people that go through the private judging, and at least in your case, or maybe some of your colleagues have talked about it, is there a lot of challenges up to the Court of Appeals?
No, actually, and that's kind of the thing that's kind of fascinating about it. When I actually started doing some research in the 2701.10 of the revised code.
Revised code 27.
Right.
So if anybody wants to look it up,
2701.10.
Okay.
There's almost no appellate work, almost no appellate cases on that. And primarily, I think, it's because they're usually done in situations where people are agreeing to it. In other words, they're usually situations where the parties have agreed to have that judge used. And it's usually a situation where the parties have pretty much worked out a settlement before I get involved. Interestingly, there's two ways you can use a private judge. One is what's called a submission, where you submit the, one's called a referral, where you refer the whole case to the judge. And the other is called a submission, where you only submit certain issues to the judge. And of those two, I've never seen a submission. I've seen all referrals. And there's about, to be a private judge in Ohio, you have to register with the Supreme Court, and you have to register with the clerk of courts of the courts that you wish to serve in. So theoretically, I could serve as a private judge in all 88 counties, but primarily I served in Medina County and then the surrounding contiguous counties, like Summit, Cuyahoga, Lorain, Ashland,
Wayne.
Yeah, Wayne.
Now, if you are a retired visiting judge and you want to get involved in the program, in the visiting judge program, is it automatically assumed that you'll want to experience the private judge?
No, I would say very few. There's only like,
they don't want to go to that.
Yeah, there's only
level.
about 17 judges who have signed up. Last time I checked with the Supreme Court, there was only about 17 judges who had signed up to be private judges. And I actually think only about maybe 5 or 6 of those were pretty active.
Now, how many states, Judge, have gone to private judges?
I think
in the United States.
The last time I checked, it started in California, and what happened in California is that there was a series of Supreme Court decisions in the 60s that said that people in state criminal prosecutions had the right to a speedy trial under the federal Constitution. This really impacted California. And so California went to a system of using private judges. They were the first state to do it. I think 7 states so far have done private judging. But interestingly enough, while California, you can actually have a private attorney be a private judge. In Ohio, it has to be a retired judge. Okay. And a retired judge is a person who has voluntarily left the judicial office
retired,
and has not gone back into private practice.
Right. Okay. So, and some judges, once they retire, they go back to their original law firm, and so that kind of disqualifies them from this type of visiting judging.
Or if they get defeated, like in a primary, they can't do it either.
So we now know why we would use a private judge. You gave us a little bit of information about that. How long usually, and in the average that you've experienced in the 4 or 5 counties you do here in Northeast Ohio, how many days does it take usually? Is there an average number?
Well, I'm
depending on the case.
Usually I'm doing uncontested divorces or dissolutions, and usually they're done within, I think, 42 days of the time they're filed. We have the hearing. And they can actually, there's some situations where if they all agree, they can actually, if they do what's called a collaborative divorce, they can actually accelerate that process. So I would say, for example, the 3 that I did today in downtown Cleveland, they were all filed, I believe, in late March. So about 42 days.
We've got 2 minutes left, and I thought maybe this would be a good time to let our Forum 360 viewers and listeners hear about how you believe the judicial, we are in a litigious society.
Yes.
What are some of the future views that you might see from a local view that our state courts are going at? Is there something new, something that you think you can leave us with?
This is what I would think about American society. Americans, I always say Americans are very optimistic people, and here's how I know that. If you ask people about problems, They will identify the criminal justice system, and they'll identify the educational system as having problems. And yet, when we have social problems, our first response is either to educate it or criminalize it. And so one of the problems that the courts are having is that the opioid crisis, for example, really impacted us. It hit us very hard. We're dealing with, like my wife, the Honorable Joyce V. Kimbler, she has double the docket I did when I left only 5 years ago. She has double the criminal cases. So that's causing problems with resources. So I would say that the main challenge facing the judiciary in Ohio is to make sure we get the resources to do the job that people want us to do.
Thank you, Judge Kimbler.
Thank you.
Forum 360, we hope that our viewers got a little bit of information. And I suppose if they go to a website like the Ohio Supreme Court, learn more about the court systems, check with the local law schools
Sure.
in Northeast Ohio, and they can find out more about what it takes to be a visiting judge. I want to thank you for being
Sure.
a part of our
Yeah,
program.
thank you, Bill.
And
Appreciate it.
Judge Kimbler, best of
I enjoyed it.
health to you as you continue your travels.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.